dive in with a quick intro to myself and what we're going to talk about today. So really this presentation is going to be about building cybersecurity maturity. We just heard from some industry titans, very large companies who've been at maturing their security programs for a long time, and some fantastic advice. What we do at OPSWAT is exactly that, and we partner with companies who are very early in their maturity journey or very mature in their journey, like folks on that past panel. We'll talk a little bit around who is OPSWAT and a couple real-world example and suggested steps to take as we go through it. A little bit about me. This is the typical, marketing bio that we share, but I'll share a bit of more of a story of how I got into industrial control systems, and it's a very unlikely one. So any Caddyshack fans in the room? Okay, we got quite a few. Fantastic. So growing up, my dad was a greenskeeper. He ran golf courses, some very, very high-end ones in New England. From a very young age, I had two working parents. I would often be at the golf course with my dad, generally getting myself into trouble or doing something I shouldn't have been. And somewhere around the age of 7 or 8, his irrigation system became, automated with mechanical timers and essentially control systems, right? And he had a heck of a time troubleshooting them, and I learned ICS at the tone out wires, look at relays, install jumper here, figure out if water goes on. And as I kind of grew and got older, I ended up working for him, in my high school and college years. I saw his industrial control system, essentially the irrigation system, get digitized. So the next step was, RF frequency controlled irrigation. So imagine 5,000 sprinklers that you can control, from an HMI, AKA just his computer. And we spent hours, if not weeks or years, troubleshooting these things in the early days. I remember one fun interference issue where we had just retrofitted and got to cellular connected control systems, so like 4 or 5 different cell stations. And it turns out that a neighboring golf course on the other side of the bay where the golf course was also was running on that same frequency. So in the middle of the day, it looked like we were hosing down golfers for no reason with the irrigation system, and it took a lot of time and effort to figure out, wow, we're on the same frequency as our neighbors. And from there, I kind of just always wanted to be in industrial controls. My first job out of college was at Schneider Electric in their facilities availability infrastructure team. So things like HVAC systems, computer room air conditioners, large-scale generators, UPSs. I kind of started there and then made a couple journeys in and out of IT and back to OT security. So a long time in Industrial Defender, who most folks have heard of. And now I'm at OPSWAT, essentially leading up their OT security business. So I'll talk a bit more about OPSWAT. So our internal joke is, one of the best companies that not many people in OT have heard about. So originally founded professional services organization focused on cybersecurity. And out of that professional services business grew what we call our OASIS framework, which is a security and compliance framework that's used on many, many big name security vendor tools that you see. So folks like Palo, Cisco ultimately use our OASIS framework to do security and compliance checking. Is a device patched? Are there vulnerabilities? Does it have open ports? From there, we entered kind of the meta defender stage of the business, where we quickly saw the opportunity to do more than just a single AV scan on incoming files, on endpoints, on web apps, on portals. It's really grown. But that's our ability to ultimately do scanning via multiple techniques, up to 30 different malware engines to find threats in files. From there, we kind of went back a little bit to our OASIS heritage and came up with a secure remote access program and protocol. So everything from SDP to compliance checking on endpoints. From there, we founded, an interesting thing called OPSWAT Academy. So this is where we're actually training critical infrastructure protection personnel, how to protect and how to, do that effectively with limited resources. Very, very popular set of training courses we do around OT. We acquired a few companies, we took in some investment, and ultimately kind of landed on the OT roadmap, a year and a half ago with our acquisition of Bayshore Networks. So those guys are now complementing out some of our network security technologies, and I'll talk a bit more about that. So been around quite a long time. Happy to be in the OT space. It's kind of where I love and live to operate. I'm going to kind of steal a bit from Sid's presentation earlier because I think he touched on some really great points around how the threat landscape is changing and how attacks are growing and digitization as, a trend. This is something where we're helping our customers in the energy space, in the oil space, where their connections that were once dial-up are no longer available from the carrier. They're kind of forced to being digitized kind of against their will, or it might be the corporate standard of, like we talked about in the last presentation, I need access to that environment, I need access to the data. And of course, folks are doing the great reason of asking why, and let's do it securely and smartly instead of putting our entire ICS network ultimately on the grid. I also really like this one, but instead of yourself being choked out, we like to say OPSWAT is one of those vendors where we are true single vendor throat to choke. We do lots of solutions. There are lots of point solution folks here. We're very, very much different from them. We have a solution that talks to every single bullet point on this list that Sid set together, and I'll talk more about how we do that. But these are ultimately the things that you need to do to work on your security and maturity. When we talk about, where is maturity, it's funny, Sid kind of puts us here from an analyst perspective in the middle, but I think it's a very unweighted middle. So we've had a massive focus on visibility over the last, say, 5 or 8 years. Ultimately, visibility solutions, essentially saying in marketing that they solve every single one of your problems, right? They do protection, they do threats, they do anomalies. It's everything you've ever wanted, right? But some of the discussion that I picked up on last conversation was I may have deployed one of those solutions and I'm either not ready for it, I'm not ready to extract the value from it, or it's just simply not providing all of that hype that I did. And that is a struggle that we help our customers through every day where they've made that investment. And as soon as people get visibility solutions, they immediately want to jump to the end and do anomaly detection and machine learning and ultimately kind of stall their program after they've used their budget for 2, 3, 4, or 5, or potentially any number of years, where they're kind of missing that center portion, the protect and defend, which is actually how you harden your defenses. Things like industrial firewalls, secure remote access, and then certainly not enough on the respond and recover side. People, if they're lucky, they're doing respond and recovery operations once a year. And we need to do much, much better than that. So it's a very unweighted average in the middle, but I think you would see lots of red on the identity, lots of red on the tech, and probably not nearly enough in that middle portion. So who here feels like they're kind of stuck in this identity phase, like our blindfolded executive here? This is kind of the conversation that I hear a lot with customers. And it's really in this identify phase, you need to have a really strong kind of goal and process statement as to why am I going to spend time, money, effort, people, cycles on identity and visibility. It's certainly a good thing, but for a large organization, you have to understand that that's going to mean putting sensors in places where sensors either were never imagined to belong or simply physically don't belong. You need to understand what data they're actually going to provide you and how you're going to generate value from that. Oftentimes when you sell someone, you can capture the data from 10,000 endpoints and look at all the vulnerabilities and look at all the open ports. Practically, what are you going to do with that data? Does that data inform you to getting to the next step of how you defend it, right? So oftentimes we're seeing a bit with the hype there on how that can actually help you. So I always like to take a step back and saying, start with your crown jewel systems, start with the systems that have real, physical consequences, look at the lower level things that aren't protected, things that you can't live without, and make sure that you have a good understanding of your inventory. And look at the tools you have. We've all deployed a number of different cyber tools, whether it be for the operational side or the IT side. It's likely that you have lists of MACs and IPs and vendors, and sure, it might be a little bit out of date, but start there and start understanding that data and start understanding how you're going to use it, right? And then my favorite part is, as much as the marketing hype says, Visibility is all you need. This step makes you 0% more protected. It lets you see what the attackers are doing much quicker, but it also, as we work with some customers, just becomes the map for how the attacker gets around. So they can see all these sensors, they can look at that information, and it becomes, another point to hop around. And this is probably one of the biggest pet peeves of me in the industry, and ultimately why I joined OPSWAT, because I was in a very much a visibility-focused company, and we kept selling visibility, but visibility alone doesn't kind of get you up that security maturity curve. And that's why I'm kind of thrilled to be here to present on how do you get up the curve and how do you do that with things like vendor consolidation and workforce shortage issues that we have today. So as we go up to protect, this is where you've kind of done your informal or formal visibility project with tools or processes or people, depending upon what makes sense for your organization. And from there, you start to do some of the, the what if scenarios that the last panel talked about. What do I really need to protect? What are the chances that someone can physically compromise this network, or this system is air gapped? And really, what is the possibility that someone's going to go to that substation and put in a 5G card and put it on the internet without someone knowing, right? We've got cameras, we've got other protections in place. Do I really need to put protections in place there? So if you think about, dollar invested versus dollar protecting you, you need to think about that really, really hard before you go down some of these roads. But you think about not just like networks and files and processes, but the people side too. What does it look like when your contractors arrive? What do you ultimately require a contractor to do before they plug their laptop into a network? Do you have certain levels of trust with contractors? Do they have access to, VPNs or MFA tokens for when they need to come in and do maintenance? And who's looking at that, right? Storage, what are you doing for files at rest? Do vulnerabilities ever come from there? Do they move around? Users, like all of those things need to come into your protection plan, and you really need to understand them well before you go off like wholesale diving into an investment of, from the last panel, shiny new object, right? Why are we going to jump into remote access when we're really only doing that once a year and we're managing it just fine with a ticket today? Defending. So this is where things get fun and more of the scenarios and situations where OPSWAT can help comes into play. So if you think about things like firewalls and then backing them up with unidirectional gateways or data diodes, those are fantastic ways to add in levels of protection beyond a simple firewall, because we all know firewalls have to be configured. Firewalls have vulnerabilities, and ultimately those are some of the key ways we see people coming in from the network side. Multi-factor authentication, of course, fantastic way to, when used properly and users are trained properly, not to just accept all the queries that come in from it, that's really helpful, right? Secure remote access where it makes sense. Of course, the folks at Old Smart Water down the road had set up TeamViewer or some other, we'll say, less secure IT type setup. Does that make sense, and do we need to shore that up? AV, when you're thinking about AV, is that something I can even put on my endpoints? Or do I need to do something else? Or with AV, is scanning of that endpoint too late? Do I need to do some sort of scanning or multi-scanning before it actually heads up to the endpoint? Data loss prevention. Do we need to worry about data actually leaving our organization? Is there anything in place to sanitize that so that when it does go to the cloud or some other physical system or person's hands, do they need all the parts of the recipe? Do they need all the IP addresses? Or is that operational work fine with basic information? And my favorite thing, and one of the things that makes OPSWAT uniquely differentiated in the market, is CDR, or content disarm and reconstruction. This is where we actually have the ability to take files that may be questionable in source, origin, or type, not trust them, and ultimately rebuild them in a trusted way. So if you know that a PDF or a Word document or Excel document is going to come in with potentially macros or be the way that a system is hijacked in, say, Windows, we can take those, regenerate them, if you will, in a safe way. These are all great, some of the protective technologies, and we'll talk more about some of those as well. Detection, so this is where folks have kind of over-rotated a bit. And this is where I mentioned this is an extreme example of where things can kind of go wrong with technology. Getting visibility to every single process variable, every single process tab, every single network conversation, and finding anomalies is a bit of a fool's errand, if you will. There are better places to invest your time and money before you get into that. That's like for the ultra mature, where you're trying to find an adversary who slipped through all of your other protective steps, right? And this is something, before you go down that journey, you need to make sure you have experts who understand things like data science, who understand machine learning. If we go back to, pick on the folks at Colonial Pipeline and their compromise, I don't think any amount of anomaly detection would have helped them. If you looked at their staff at the time of compromise, they didn't have a single person with a cybersecurity in their title or their job description when you went on LinkedIn. I mean, we need to get back to some of those basic core foundational things. And this is where it becomes very important to look at the steps before this and really understand what additional visibility is going to get you and what you're going to do with it. So respond and recover, just a quick hearken to any Parks and Recs fans in the building. There's a fantastic episode where there's a bird flu outbreak, and they have to go through essentially Murphy's Law of every single thing that will happen in that environment. And it's fantastic. And its practice needs to be just not the OT team, not just the IT team in isolation. They need to get together. You need to understand your vendor's role. Oftentimes, the vendor automation OEM of choice will be the long pole. It's someone's going to have to fly from Germany or Switzerland to go and figure out how to reprogram all your HMIs and engineering workstations that have been ransomwared. There's years of learning and changing and project files that may not be backed up correctly. Those are all those core things that are hard to get back. Do you have your switch configurations backed up? Is all that information stored somewhere safely, where if ransomware is running wild, is it going to be protected? Great, certainly things like incident response retainers and cybersecurity insurance certainly help you, but don't let that give you a false sense of security when it comes to what they're going to be capable of. As you get into your IR scenarios, it'll be very quickly that team is going to ask you all of your security fundamentals, where are your assets, back to the inventory, back to how you're protecting it, back to what are the possibilities and ways they came in. Do you have centralized logging? All those great things that you should have done in your build-up to this step get used. And then cybersecurity insurance, similarly, they'll certainly help you with potential business loss, but the thing with cybersecurity insurance is it doesn't help with actually correcting the problem that you left open in your environment. If you had no firewalls or vulnerabilities or no MFA, cybersecurity insurance is not going to pay for the betterment of your environment. You'll still be on your own to pay for that, and you actually won't be able to get cybersecurity insurance until you actually go through those betterment steps, which is quite eye-opening when we've worked with some customers in that regard. And as I mentioned, practicing once a year is not enough. You need to have closer interactions with teams, and I've found that some of the best strategies to kind of pull the IT and OT teams together is just kind of start with informal check-ins. Have the leads from OT go to lunch with the leads from IT, start to talk about their problems, and as we mentioned in some of the earlier sessions, lots of the strategies in IT can be provided and applied correctly in OT, and those conversations are what we're seeing some of the more mature organizations do and how folks are actually getting there. So start the bridge, start to build that gap, and build that kind of personal relationship and where it helps. So as we switch into how OPSWAT helps to secure and mature and ultimately reduce risk in some of these environments, we've got a very comprehensive platform that is not just a single point solution. They are all solutions that have meant to work and ultimately design together. They're central managed. They're protecting things like cloud and email all the way down to the lowest levels of the Purdue model. They're integrated by design, so you've got one central management console that shows you all of these different protective technologies. We have a massive amount of services to complement that. So everything from vulnerability assessment services, pen tests, to a full-blown SOC offering if you're not at the point where you're able to do things like 24/7 monitoring. We have those capabilities. And really our whole focus, as I mentioned in our kind of 2-minute pitch, is protecting critical infrastructure. So we specialize in those 16 sectors, whether it be finance to folks like yourselves who are more kind of into the OT space, prevention not based on detection, so things like CDR are those things that can discover 0 days before their details are published. We know how to build up files and network solutions with data diodes where you're actually starting with a clean pipe, whether it be a file-based pipeline or a network-based pipeline. And we make everything super usable, and as well as we have a full-blown training academy. We've certified over, tens of thousands of folks through our training academy, everything from what is OT, what is critical infrastructure, into advanced techniques on how to protect yourself with firewalls, or how do you protect a web app from a file-based upload attack. So this is another way to kind of visualize our solution set, and this is a set of slides that I really like to present. I like to present it from the OT side up. So if you think about the major consequence areas of OT, or when things like PLCs and RTUs become compromised, the things that are actually controlling the industrial process, whether you're generating electricity, controlling a pipeline. At that layer, we have our industrial firewall, specialty built firewall, to understand those operational technology protocols, to allow things like reads and not writes, to allow time of day rules, to make sure that as close to a zero trust type connection between the engineering workstation and those RTUs is occurring. So that's something you can put in to actually stop accidental access from someone plugging into a switch and scanning the network and seeing that, oh, there's a PLC down there, let me try to reboot it, compromise it, put in suspect logic. So that's kind of at our lowest level where we like to do protection. As we move up the stack, we've got things like Meta Access OT. So this is our secure remote access for OT. This is, again, a same solution that understands those OT protocols to actually allow contractors in to do things like modify Modbus. So we provide the ability to not only access individual devices, but it's individual device by protocol, by user, by time, all with audit logging, as well as screen recording sessions and the ability to actually break a connection when it appears as though a contractor or some other person is taking an incorrect step. If we round out our network bit of connections, this is where, as much as I harp on visibility, we do have a visibility solution ourselves. That's in our OPSWAT neuralizer, and this is providing visibility at that lowest level all the way up to the inside of your air gap or the inside of your DMZ. Our big differentiator here is its ease of use, its deployment. It's easy out of the box, simply plug it in without having to have much from an IT standpoint. It simply stands alone, more like an HMI. It's not packaged much like an IT solution, but more like an OT HMI. Now, as we move up further, we've got solutions related to removable media and data transfer. So that's kind of the next set of key solutions. Removable media still very much relied upon in critical infrastructure, whether it's behind an air gap or simply just the way that contractors need to bring information into the organization. We leverage our MetaDefender kiosk, so this is where we can actually stop threats at the edge of OT, whether it be at the IT side of the operation or right in the inside of your air gap. Not only do we stop those threats from removable media, but we have the ability to actually enforce policy against removable media. So oftentimes, you can put a scanning kiosk in and contractors will promptly walk directly by it, bypass it, or potentially get confused on which USB keys came from which customer site. So this is where we actually have the ability to bring in our media validation agent as well as our USB firewall. Both of those devices have the ability to sit outside of an industrial asset and actually stop removable media from being mounted if it hasn't been properly scanned. We'll also stop media from being mounted if someone's made a change on that media between the time it was scanned. So a very, very strong way to not only have a policy-based removable media security program, but actually put in some some protected, restrictive controls there. Now, oftentimes folks are trying to move away from using removable media, which is certainly an admirable goal, and we've helped lots of people get there. To do that, we've actually got our MetaDefender Vault, which is a secure file share. It's actually how internally we share files with each other between development, test, marketing. It's a great way to not only securely share files or take in files from a contractor, because as they come in, they get scanned with not only our 30 different AV engines trying to detect with as much efficiency as possible, but it also has things like DLP and CDR, where you can actually remove those threats, not at time of scanning, but perpetually as those firmware binaries, updates, PDFs, whatever needs to come into the environment. They all sit there and they're continually scanned, as opposed to that one-time scan when someone actually enters that environment. Now, another complementary technology to that is our data diode and unidirectional security gateway. This is where if you really want and need to have those one-way automated transfers in or out of your environment, this is where we're helping customers ensure that malware does not bridge the gap, making sure that you have a layer of protection beyond a simple firewall that obviously is restricted to change management process, or maybe in an emergency someone had to turn on access and forgot about it. NetWall becomes that catch-all to do that. This is also very popular among customers needing to share historian data northbound, not only to the IT side, but potentially to the cloud as well. So we've got some great integrators and connectors that all encompass the NetWall solution. Also kind of piggybacking on the kiosk use case, when contractors need to actually bring in physical laptops, we have the way to secure them and scan them with our MetaDefender drive. So this is, think about a way to boot a contractor's laptop to a secure solution that can actually scan it, validate it, and make sure that there's no threats on it, and then let them boot back to their normal OS. So we'll actually go and do some deep inspection on those files, ultimately to make sure that that contractor's not bringing anything that's suspect. Now, on the OT side, we also have central management to kind of wrap all this up into a single pane glassboard, and then SOC services that actually go on top of it. So all of our solution, as well as any other solutions in this environment, can send up things like syslog, alerts, events, all to our SOC. As we switch gears into protecting the IT side of the house, we've got a whole host of solutions for protecting things that are coming from threats. So email, being one of the biggest threat vectors for any organization, is very popular for us right now. So we're able to take some of those core protective technologies that we've got on our kiosk, multi-scanning, CDR, file sanitization, DLP, file-based vulnerabilities, where you can actually see that an installer or an ISO has a vulnerability in it. Let's make sure that we're not going to introduce that. We take that similar technology and wrap it around an ICAP server for folks doing file uploads, a web app. So you've got a file-based web app that you need to protect. We can actually sit in front of that web app and actually scan things. On the non-scanning side, we have our IT-based secure remote access solution that also does compliance and posture management. So making sure that endpoints have the appropriate AV installed, making sure endpoints aren't using any unauthorized programs. It blocks things like data exfiltration, copy pastes, all those great things that we have solutions for. And on the IT side, we can actually do all this central management in the cloud. And when you combine kind of all the parts of OPSWAT together, you get an extremely mature company to work with. And it's actually a great way to up-level your security on each one of those individual steps, whether you're in the IT side or the OT side. We have some tremendous tech to help folks get there. So with that, I think in closing, that's our key mission statement. So if anyone asks you, I've never heard of that OPSWAT, what do they do? Very easy, protect the world's critical infrastructure. You can certainly come visit us in our booth. We actually have a product launch today that just went live. We're taking our kiosk technology actually mobile. So it's a ruggedized, hardened tablet form factor that you can take out into a substation, onto an oil rig, out into the desert, have it accidentally run over, drop it in the water. It will be fine. Once you pick it up, dust it off, you're still able to ultimately use that removable media scanning solution. So that was launched today. Stop by the booth for a demo there. We've got a great panel session with one of our customers in the automation space, Hitachi Energy, talking about how they use us to secure their DevOps supply chain with some of our core scanning capabilities. And then we've got, of course, the whole platform on display in our booth, and we can do demos of any of these technologies at any time.